Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. I'm Kate.
And I'm Stephanie.
And together with you, we're Three Heads. Today we're talking about the need to norm, both for expectations and grading when you're part of a PLC. And the more cohesive your PLC is, the more need you have to do this.
And I think it can feel so much more intimidating than really any other part of collaborating, because it feels very much like, what do you mean you didn't get the same grade I did? Like, I'm bad at my job, are you saying? I don't know what I'm doing? It can feel really vulnerable, but it's maybe one of the best learning experiences, but also, again, just in being fair for students, making you a better teacher, it is a really valuable experience.
Yeah, I think the earlier you do it in the year, the better.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do it with sort of your first big assignment, that's helpful. You all get started off on the right foot, and it takes away that element of somebody's challenging the way you're grading. And I think in terms of expectations, that's something that's really helpful to set up at the outset. Mm-hmm. But if you've already started school this year, you're still in the early enough part that you can sort of figure things out together. You could also do a reset at the semester. Mm-hmm. But this is just something that's really important to do, because when you think about it, your students are competing with one another. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't want to think about education in these terms, and this is certainly not the way learning works. Right. However, for our students at the high school level, mm-hmm. they are concerned about their class rank, mm-hmm. unless your school has gotten rid of it, which, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. This is the reason why. But also they are concerned about grades and grade point average, not because they particularly care about them, but because it's so important to them for the college application and admissions process. So it's doing sort of a service to them, mm-hmm. maybe a disservice to learning in its purest sense, but we all know those are not the conditions we're working under.
Ideal world is for another podcast or video.
So let's go ahead and get started talking about the things that you should consider, the things that you should bring up as you go through this norming process.
Yeah, so I think we talked about just the valuable conversations that can come out of it. We talked about the fairness and consistency. I think one thing is just making sure everyone's teaching the same thing. I know there have been opportunities where, Kate and I collaborated more closely than I would imagine most teachers do. And there would be times where we would be sitting and grading together, and she would be like, you can't give credit for that. We did this. And I was like, oh, that's not how I explained it. And so it is really helpful just to, and neither of us is right or wrong, but just to kind of make sure we're on the same page about mm-hmm. how we're approaching, how we're explaining something, so that our students, who are competing with one another, are being held to the same standards. And when we're creating assessments and projects and assignments together, it's helpful for them to have learned the same information.
Yeah. And it's helpful because we tend to become very myopic in mm-hmm. our classrooms. We tend to become hyper-focused on what we are doing. But we should be working with one another and reflecting on best practices mm-hmm. and what are you teaching versus what are you teaching, and what are you doing versus what are you doing. And it could be from the smallest things to the biggest things. I remember at one point when we taught AP together, we would do after school test correction mm-hmm. sessions. That was a really big thing at our school, something that like every AP student expected to have. And Stephanie had 6th period, which was our last class of the day, conference, and my AP class was 6th period. So she would say her students mm-hmm. who didn't have a 6th period, they could come in and mm-hmm. work during that time. And I was like, whoa, that's not fair.
Which is true, because I didn't even think about it. Like, to me, that is yeah, well, if you have an early release, you are still giving up your free time. Like,
Right.
it doesn't set me out, but yeah,
Right.
she was right. Like, oh yeah, that isn't fair to these other students who.
Right. And the idea, we were trying to create this sense of community and have different people working together, and it not be sort of like a hangout session, and actually be productive, because some of her students would be there for 2 hours.
That's true.
And my students would be there for 1 hour. Now, everybody should have been able to make their corrections in the 1 hour.
Yeah.
But if her students are staying there for 2 hours and they're just leisurely working through. On the opposite side, it could be something like how we grade essays and what we consider earning a point for a thesis, and what we say doesn't earn a point for a thesis, or preparing for an exam. I know Stephanie and another one of our colleagues were usually the ones who wrote the exams, and so sometimes they would teach knowing that, well, I wrote the exam, I know this is going to be on the test.
Yeah.
And I would be like, well, yeah, I looked at that test, but I didn't write it, I didn't memorize it.
I haven't had it in my head the same way.
I didn't focus on it the same way that you focused on it. Of course mine got it wrong.
And I think it's also just, as English teachers, it can be helpful because we can get so like being the master of our classroom, where it's like, I'm the expert on literature. And so there have been times where we disagreed about what a story meant in our understanding. And it's, I mean, in college, we would disagree and like come to new understandings, but you get so used to like, well, it's my classroom, I'm right, I know more than these kids. And so to have another adult who can engage with you and help you to shift your understanding of the text is valuable as well.
Yeah. And I think probably my favorite thing about this is you find out, what can I not stand grading?
Yes.
What can you not stand grading? And maybe we can do a little swipsies.
That was, I think, for years, I hated grading guided reading questions. And we had a novel flip chart review activity that she hated, but I loved. And so I never again graded a GRQ, and she never again graded a flip chart, because we graded together often enough that, one, I trusted her to switch, but also that way the same person scored all the flip charts for the AP students. The same person graded all the GRQs. So whether we would have agreed or not that it didn't matter, but like if I was really hyper-focused on one thing, every student got that attention instead of like she's focused on one thing and I'm focused on another.
Yeah, which I think really that's what you're trying to create is equity in this for your students, because that's what they are thinking is happening. And not even that's the logical conclusion that you reach, but it's just sort of, that's understandable, is they're thinking, oh, okay, so we do the same thing as this other class every day. Yeah. So everything would be graded pretty much the same.
And you would think that students don't notice. They do notice when they're not graded the same. Sometimes it takes a while, but there are instances where they start to realize that this student is not having to revise 15 times, but I am, and that's not fair. And you want to avoid that just for fairness's sake, as and like your own like hassles in life, right? Having to argue with that. But I think going along with the divide and conquer grading, you also get opportunities really to do more of like, this course is a community instead of just my class section. Like during distance learning, we would do a lot of discussion board activities where students were in groups with students from other classes. If I didn't trust her grading, I wouldn't be willing to do that, because no, these are my students, I'm controlling their grade. And so the more you're aligned and trusting one another, it really opens the door to a lot of different options.
I think a lot of people tend to think of norming in terms of, you're in this room with 300 people and we're all going to agree what the highest score point is. And theoretically, if we are all experts in the same discipline, theoretically, we should be ending up within margin of error, the same point. But it doesn't always work that way. And I know for us, a lot of our experience with norming was school-wide. You are never going to have a true, clear norming session when everybody is experts in different subject matter. If we, God forbid, had to norm for math or science, my understanding of what would be acceptable would be completely different than what a science teacher's expectation would be. Number one, because they know what they're teaching in the classroom, they know the content matter much better, but I'm looking at it as, well, I don't know this, so it seems like they know it.
They got the right answer. I don't know what that answer is.
So I think a lot of us hear that norming, and that's the sort of thing that we think of, when really, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, but they would be really meaningful conversations, you're going to be much more on the same page already. And if you aren't, it's helpful to have those conversations. I know we had a new member of the PLC last year, and he was very opposed to the idea of only taking 10% off for late work. What he wanted to do was, if work is late, it's 50% off the top, no matter what. And we were like, well, then what's the motivation to do it? But we had a conversation where, okay, well, what are you thinking? What's your rationale for this? And he explained his rationale, and then we explained our rationale, and we both came to it with, well, this is, sort of our anecdotal evidence. But that was much more helpful to have that conversation, and we had that conversation before the school year even started. It's helpful to have that, as opposed to in November, you have an upset parent, you have an upset student. Oh, if my child was in so-and-so's class, then he would have this opportunity, but he's in your class and he doesn't have that. And you get rid of that before it becomes an issue, which, we have to deal with enough issues as teachers. Let's not invite more problems.
I think it also lets you do what we're quote unquote supposed to do as teachers. You go to trainings and you talk about data-driven instruction and how you're supposed to be looking at test results and applying that back to your teaching. And really, no one has time for that. Like, you're not analyzing your data. You're not gonna go back and reteach something because you got to move forward. But when we were grading together and having those conversations more often, it was great because I usually, not by the last year, but usually I would grade something before Kate would. And so if I was like, oh, this rubric is the worst, well, I'm not going to change it. I already printed it. I already graded some. She hasn't graded it yet. Or if she noticed a problem, is like, okay, yeah, remind me next year because I already graded mine. But when we were kind of more on the same page, if we both were like, oh, this rubric is the worst, we would sit down and fix it. It wouldn't kind of be like oh yeah, if we remember to do it last year, or gosh, none of our students can do this. We were more likely to change the way we taught the next unit, even if we weren't reteaching, we were making adjustments based on how students were doing. And so it lets you kind of do that data-driven instruction in a way that doesn't require you to have a formal data analysis meeting.
It also helps you make more real-time adjustments. Because if 300 people didn't understand something, okay, well, we do need to move forward, and there's not really a reason to go back and rehash what we've already done, but let's make a point of incorporating it in some way moving forward. And that's a lot easier to do, because sometimes when you're just on your own, it feels like, oh, I guess mine didn't get it. I don't know what happened.
This is what it is.
But if we're all seeing the same sort of results, and those results are based on the same expectations, then it's much more meaningful, as opposed to, oh, well, you gave your kids the test before the test. I didn't
Didn't
think
do
to
that.
do that. So of course we got different scores. That kind of thing isn't really happening.
And it's kind of funny. I'm working through one of our units right now, and I can see the fruits of this, because as I'm going through it, I'm like, this isn't our good format. Like, this needs to be revised. And it's because as we were going through the year, we were like, oh, they're doing this wrong. We got to fix this. And so now I'm like back on the earlier one. Ugh, it's not right.
Yeah. You see the first unit we did and the first assignments within that unit, we thought they were going to be doing this.
Yeah.
And we realized we need to bring it down here a little bit. And so, but it's nice to see that, because students only benefit from that sort of learning and understanding that you have as your professional community.
And I think it is a good, again, resource for you. We talked about it in terms of like dividing and conquering assignments you don't like, or, if you have unbalanced classes. There were years where like, I would have like a 40-person class and she would have a 6-period, like 20-person class. And so we would like even that out a little bit in our scoring. But I think it's also great because every English teacher has been in a situation where you get this weird essay that like it doesn't really fit any of the scoring points and you don't know what to do with it. You can't decide if it and so it's so nice to have a colleague who completely like understands the same text, the same assignment, the same expectations, who can help you navigate, like, is this a 4 or a 3? Do I give them the point? Do I not? And so it is really helpful just to have someone you can text and be like, we would do that all the time. Does this get a point for a thesis? Does this?
Yeah. So hopefully you found this to be helpful. If there have been obstacles to your PLC norming or coming up with expectations, or we've brought up questions that you have about the topic, please feel free to drop a comment down below. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon. Bye.